recently, with everything that's going on, I've been interested in how nations control information, on how people rule nations. Because we often talk about elites and oligarchs, but in actuality, there's families throughout history that have ruled nations, and they're trained in ruling nations. There's playbooks on how to rule nations. And obviously in the modern era, it's a little bit different than it was in medieval times, but I think a lot of the same principles still hold true. So I just did some research and wrote an article on how information controls nations, media, power, and the war for public reality. Some interesting things that I found throughout doing this research is that media doesn't necessarily tell people what to think, it tells people what to think about. And that distinction actually explains most of political reality. It doesn't tell people what to think, it tells them what to think about. So it shows people common themes, it shows people what they want you to think about, and it only talks about topics that it wants its populace to think about. So nations that control the media only allow certain topics to be talked about and talked about in certain ways so that the narrative is controlled. It's not full-blown censorship. They don't necessarily hide the realities of the world, but they only talk about topics that they want their people to think about. It's controlling the agenda, and through that you control kind of the narrative political battlefield. Like, if you cover inflation for 6 months, ignore immigration, the electorate organizes around inflation regardless of which problem is actually worse. So if you cover one topic for a long time and ignore another topic, it doesn't matter if that other topic's actually more important. The topic that you've been covering and talking about is the one is what people are going to organize around. Framing is even more powerful. Like, the same event reported as a crime wave versus systematic failure activates different emotions, assigns different blame, and points towards different solutions. So the power of framing is very real, and that's a very real thing throughout controlling information, controlling conversations. It's a common topic in sales. It's a common topic in controlling the narrative, on how you frame that narrative. Because if you frame it as a crime wave, you're going to talk about all these different things related to crime. If you frame it as a systematic failure, you're going to talk about, oh, it's the people in charge of this city, the people in charge of this state are creating this systematic failure, regardless of what's actually true. And governments that understand this don't actually need heavy censorship. So I believe this is like a way that the US is actually controlled, and the narrative in the US is controlled, because we have a little bit of censorship, but it's mainly on private platforms. But in reality, it's more just what topics they cover and how they frame them. And then repetition of certain topics creates this third lever to how you can control a populace. Claims repeated often enough feel true, not because people are stupid, but because our brains actually mislead familiarity as evidence. So if you hear something over and over and over again, your brain actually kind of starts to misinterpret that and just believe that that is evidence that supports the overall topic. And this affects educated people as much as everyone else. Educated people aren't actually more resistant to this. They're just better at building sophisticated justifications for whatever their kind of in-group, or the group that they're a part of, the group that they're listening, believes, which actually makes sense because the education system in the United States doesn't really teach and show you how to independently, critically think through issues, through ideas. It kind of just presents evidence to you. And the more you research that evidence, the smarter you'll be, the higher grades that you get. So that's kind of a systematic issue that we've experienced in the United States, where educated people are able to make better justifications for certain topics. And there's a term called pluralistic ignorance. It's where people suppress private doubts when they believe that everyone else is agreeing on a certain topic. So if you see everyone else agreeing on the Iran war, or a certain political ideology or political move that a certain group is making, if everyone agrees on that in your group, then you're more likely to suppress all your doubts and not voice them, because you don't want the group to turn against you. In the USSR, Soviet citizens all privately knew that the system was failing, but they assumed that their neighbors all believed in it, so they all performed enthusiastically publicly. And this illusion actually held true until 1989 when the system collapsed. Also, Germany in 1940s achieved total media environment control within 18 months of Hitler's appointment. Another example of this is Rwanda's Radio Miles, where they dehumanized Tutsis for 2 years before a genocide. So they talked about it forever before they implemented it, which is kind of like a hedonic adaptation where you get used to a topic being heard so that your emotions are less shocked, or your system's less shocked when something actually goes through, like with the Iran war. It's something they've been talking about since the 80s, since the 90s, because it's something they've wanted to do. And then when they do it, there's no public outrage because they've talked about it for so long. It's a form of like anticipatory pleasure depletion or hedonic adaptation. These people performing this are the people that rule the nations. We kind of think that there's people who are elected, like congressmen, the president. We think there's all these people, but there's groups of people who have been ruling nations for a long time. And there's groups of people in the government that only focus on how to rule nations. And that's across the board. Any functional nation, any hegemon like the US, Russia, China, they have people who are PhDs who are studying and doing research and development on how to more effectively control the populace and rule the nation. Right now in the US, media ownership is consolidated from roughly 50 major companies. That was in 1983. 50 major companies controlled all US media. Today, in 2026, it's around 6. It's the big 6. From 1979, 51% of people reportedly trusted newspapers. Today, it's less than 18% actually trust and have faith in what the newspapers are saying and news organizations are saying. Facebook's own internal research has showed its algorithm amplified high emotion content at 6 times the rate of neutral content, not by executive decision, but as the automatic output of an engagement optimization function. This control relationship in democracies is structural, and it actually leads to reporters self-censoring to protect access. Editors then pull punches to protect advertisers, and journalists adopt a consensus view of prestige outlets in order to protect their careers. So this outcome is systematic. You see this with the Iraq WMD failure, the 2008 financial crisis, and missed stories of American deindustrialization. This wasn't necessarily censorship, but it was a structural alignment between institutional media and powerful actors, because all these people want to protect their jobs. They want to protect their careers, and they're kind of weak individuals. When you care more about yourself and your career than your country and the truth, I would think you're more of a weak individual. You're unable to stand up for yourself. You're happier just going out and drinking on the weekends, spending time with your friends and family, which is all fine and all great. But when it comes to controlling narratives and informing people, these are very serious decisions. You have a lot of responsibility. You have a lot of power. And if you're just cowardly, you're going to say, no, I want to protect, I won't run this story. I want to protect my career. I don't want to cover that. I want to protect my career. I want to protect my paycheck. And it's a common issue with a lot of people throughout the West. We're all very comfortable in our lives. We are all very blessed, and we're very, very comfortable. So it's hard to make yourself uncomfortable, to push yourself further if you don't have that in you, to try to always become a better person and push yourself mentally and physically to do the hard things that need to be done. And we need more people like that in media, in news, because right now we're seeing kind of a structural decline of the whole system because weak people have been leading the charge for so long. Without institutional backing, independent journalists actually face brutal financial pressure to build personal brands, which pushes towards sensationalism and audience capture, telling subscribers what they want to hear rather than what's true. So this is kind of the other side of the coin with independent media. And you see this with like Alex Jones. Individuals start sensationalism about stories to try to capture audiences, to try to make people watch your video longer because they're like, what? This is happening? Holy, like what? This is crazy. So you start to kind of sensationalize the stories when in reality, everything's like pretty boring and super gray. And the result of this taking place on the institutional side and then in the independent media space with sensationalism, you have this divided information environment where captured institutional media on one side and then audience captured independent media is on the other. The most effective information control isn't censorship, but it's flooding the market. And we saw this with Russia's strategy in 2010. It wasn't to suppress the truth, it was to make the truth indeterminate, produce so much noise, so many competing narratives, so many pseudo controversies that the signal becomes impossible to locate. The truth becomes impossible or too hard to find, so people just give up and go about their day. The goal isn't to convince people of a specific lie with this technique, but it's to exhaust and create cynicism in the people. And there's actually a deeper paradox here where every sophisticated information control system, state propaganda, corporate media strategy, algorithmic platforms, they all face the same ceiling. The more effectively it controls the information environment, the more it actually degrades the quality of feedback that the controller receives about the world. An example of this is Stalin's information monopoly, where he receives systematically distorted intelligence about his own military capacity before Operation Barbarossa. The US administration that successfully managed the narrative around the Iraq War actually deprived itself of accurate truth and signals about the occupation's trajectory until the insurgency was so unmanageable. So information control is a powerful tool that when fully deployed destroys the foundation on which effective power actually rests. So what this is all saying is that when you control the information so much that people are scared to speak the truth because their careers are affected, their families are affected, people get targeted, they're threatened, their families are threatened, that people actually stop reporting on the truth altogether. And that happens internally as well, which creates this misaligned system where the people in control aren't accurately gathering the truth and data to make correct decisions upon, which ultimately leads to a collapse of the system. And the most likely trajectory with what we're seeing today played out over the next decade is it's not a dramatic collapse, but it's this accumulated dysfunction. And we're seeing this play out today with institutional media declining. It's going to keep further declining because nothing is changing. Independent media breaks into small, high quality tiers and a large outrage economic tier. AI generated content floods the environment, making source verification harder. We're seeing this today with the Iran war. Some of the clips that are coming out, some of the footage that's coming out, you're unable to verify whether it's true or not, whether this is real or not, so you don't report on it. I actually just experienced this today. There was a clip of, and I'll play it here for you guys, but reportedly Al-Mazar Beach in Dubai, there's a clip of a Saudi Arabian F-16 chasing down a Shahed drone and firing on it. And it doesn't seem right. I'll play it up here. It doesn't seem, something seems off about it, so I didn't report on it. And that's actually a pretty scary future as this gets harder and harder to discern the truth from reality. And we're gonna have to really create communities where we're able to open source footage from the ground in conflict zones and verify that footage and then report on it. And it's gonna have to all be done internally. And I'm actually working on a system for this right now. But through all this, governance is gonna get worse. Not through crises, but through the slow accumulation of decisions made on wrong, infactual premises with populations who no longer share a common picture of reality. The real damage from the information war is not going to come from successful manipulation of target populations. It's going to come from the degradation of information environments and the controllers themselves. Governments and institutions making increasingly poor decisions because the systems they built to control others have poisoned their own truth, have poisoned their own signals. And that failure will be visible within a decade, I believe, because we're already seeing that failure today, and it will misattribute to almost everything except its actual cause. So they're going to blame everyone but themselves. And we're seeing this today. I just saw Fox just did a report playing Ukrainian drone footage saying it was US drones targeting Iranian drones, but it was actually Ukrainian drones targeting Russian drones. So all this we're seeing play out in real time.